So why are there no documented cases of Scrapie in St Croix sheep? I had a friend tell me there had never been a documented case of Scrapie in St Croix sheep, and I had a hard time believing it, but I found out it was true, but also I found out the reason why. Scrapie is a fatal degenerative disease of sheep, and it's caused by a prion, which is a misfolded protein. And once it gets into a sheep, it's fatal, but some sheep have it and some sheep don't. Scrapie affects a sheep's nervous system, makes them lose weight, hunches them over, but it also gives them these bare patches that they try and scrape off. It's a nervous condition, and it ultimately kills the sheep. That's a horrible way to go. The sheep will try and scrape itself against anything because of the nervous condition, and that's the name Scrapie came from. And the prions can exist in the environment for decades. And Scrapie is caused by a prion, which is a misfolded protein, which once it's introduced to a sheep that's susceptible, it will cause the disease. But it's more than just prions, it's also the genetics of the sheep. There's a place in the genetic code at codons 136, 154, and 171 that indicates whether or not a sheep will get Scrapie or not. Codon 154 doesn't show a lot of impact on the Scrapie susceptibility, but it seems to have some sort of effect on the incubation time, or how long it takes, how many years it takes for the disease to show itself. The most important codons are 136 and 171 that control the incubation time as well as the susceptibility of the disease, and that's what the USDA uses. But codon 171 is the major factor in Scrapie, and that's the one we're going to look at today because that's the most important codon with this. But it also points out that the entire genetic code in these sheep have probably been destroyed in a lot of different places. We just know about these 3 codons. There's probably other places too. The other thing about Scrapie is it really didn't become known until at least 1732 AD. So something happened around the year 732 or thereafter that created this problem. And so I believe in cause and effect, so we're going to try and figure out what that is. About this time, Robert Bakewell and others were aggressively inbreeding their livestock to create selective breeding of livestock. And this is called artificial selection. Now, this is like 80 years before Mendel did his experiments with peas, and they really didn't know what they were doing. However, it was a groundbreaking experiment, and it was the basis for Darwin's natural selection. After seeing how quickly that Bakewell could create a new species or a different type of sheep or cow, Darwin thought the same thing. Bakewell would relentlessly inbreed his own sheep to create new breeds of sheep, and his results were quick. He got what he needed very quickly. He also inbred his cattle and got them where they would produce a lot more meat and grow a lot faster. He nearly doubled the size of the cows of his time. And that's what you see today. A lot of people are inbreeding their sheep and other animals to make them larger, and they're causing problems. So Wikipedia records that there was a controversy of Bakewell and his methods because Bakewell was thought to be the one that actually created Scrapie in sheep and these other prionic diseases because he overloaded the inbreeding. Here's 2 of the references Wikipedia shows. It says, as soon as Scrapie broke out in Combers District and the surrounding areas, all the aristocrats pointed a finger at Bakewell and his breeding practices. And they started seeing Scrapie showed up in the areas where Bakewell was doing his work. In this chart, we see that all of the occurrences of Scrapie outside of Europe have come from the UK. They've not come from other places. And they're in these over-engineered breeds that the English people have created following Bakewell's methods. The mistake that Bakewell made and many other breeders today are making is they're using this form of line breeding where they're breeding the same animal to multiple generations of its own offspring. And while that does reinforce the traits they're trying to get, like a larger carcass size, it also destroys the breed in the long run. Just they're Bakewelling their own breeds. Yet if we look at the Mouflon, which is the ancestor of all modern sheep, we see absolutely no Scrapie in the Mouflon. Now here's a study on the Mouflon on the island of Cyprus, and they found out that from their study of 17 Mouflon that there was absolutely no Scrapie in the nervous system of these 17 Mouflons that were studied. And in this much larger study of the German Mouflon, which has Germany has the second largest Mouflon stock in the world, they did a study on 823 Mouflons from 38 different counties in Germany. And they found out that the prion protein could not be detected in any of the brains or lymph node samples from any of these 823 Mouflons. From this, they found the probability of Scrapie is negligible. And with this being one of the most comprehensive studies of prions in Mouflons, they found absolutely no evidence of prionic diseases in Mouflons in Germany. So what about St Croix sheep? Has there ever been a documented case of prionic diseases or Scrapie in St Croix? Now, it's really hard to do research and find a negative that there's not been a case. So I had to ask ChatGPT to do the research for me. And so I asked it, has there ever been a case of Scrapie in St Croix sheep? And it came back and said, no, there's never been a documented case of Scrapie in St Croix sheep. And the reason the St Croix doesn't have Scrapie is because of the genetics. It's not susceptible to it because it's got RR in codon 171 instead of QQ like a lot of these Scrapie sheep have. So something that Robert Bakewell did back in the 1700s with his rapid inbreeding to create new breeds of sheep, it unlocked the codon 171 to produce QQ instead of RRs or RQs or QRs type codes in that codon. And that is what's made all these sheep, these modern sheep breeds, susceptible to Scrapie. Yet the St Croix has not been Bakewelled into this problem. St Croix is one of the few sheep breeds still left that's not been line breeded into destroying its own genetics. So what's the alternative to line breeding and inbreeding for improving the genetics of a flock? Well, we need to look at nature. Nature does something called natural selection, where they call out the weakest members, but they leave all the diversity in the flock as much as possible. And that's what we need to follow. Now, the phenotype of an animal is just what's being expressed, just the outside appearance of the animal. And when you look at that, you don't see all the genotype or the genetic information that's inside that animal. So when you take a single animal and you try and breed it over and over and over to your flock as a superior animal, you may be breeding in these bad genetics that also come in. Because when Robert Bakewell did his line breeding, he had no idea that he was exposing a bad genetic trait. And likewise, a lot of these backyard breeders don't know that they're really ruining their own breed by line breeding. I think the only reason the St Croix sheep has escaped Scrapie and being Bakewelled into having these genetic problems is the fact that it's not large enough to be considered commercially usable. That's kind of kept out of the commercial market. So nobody's really trying to breed these sheep to be bigger and bigger and bigger each year. And so that's why they're nearly resistant to Scrapie still, while these other big, large commercial sheep breeds, they've got a problem. And if you're worried about whether your sheep are susceptible to Scrapie, there is a way that you can do genetic testing for codon 171 and 136 to find out if you're actually susceptible. Scrapie has been eliminated in most of the world by eliminating the prions instead of looking at the genetic part of what's going on here. And when you look at just the prions, this is something called the germ theory of disease, where you're looking at just the germ as being the cause. But that's not the case here. Antoine Beauchamp came up with a thing called terrain theory, and that is that it is the body that allows disease to come into it. It's not just the germs, it's the body. Now, he was entirely for terrain theory, or that the body was a mechanism for whether you got a disease or not, while Pasteur was for that germs were the sole cause. The correct answer for Scrapie is it's both germs and the terrain. It's both the prions and the genetics that causes the problem. So if you're going to try to eliminate Scrapie by getting rid of all the prions and keeping the place pristine from prions, you need to ask yourself, where did the first prions come from that caused Scrapie? Because prions can self-assemble, and so you can have this disease forever. What you need to address is the genetics. That is, we need to breed sheep that are genetically resistant to Scrapie, but also we need to understand what caused the problem in the first place. Because if line breeding can cause Scrapie and cause a lot of other problems, we need a whole new way of breeding sheep. And I think it has to follow natural selection and culling the weak and having a gradual change to our genetics instead of a radical change. Well, thanks for listening to the video today. Thanks.